Hey there guys, so let's talk about this fight that's going to be coming up in the group stage 1 of the World Boxing Super Series at light welterweight. So unbeaten Josh Taylor is going to be taking on unbeaten Ryan Martin in a couple of months, and the fight's going to be taking place at the Hydro Arena in Glasgow. Now, let's talk about this one. Now, when I first heard about this fight, I had to do some research because I didn't know much about Ryan Martin. I don't believe I've ever watched Ryan Martin fight before, so I had to look at his record, and I only looked at it once, I think. And I had to find what fight footage of his I could. There were a few highlights on YouTube here and there, a few bits of his fights, a couple of sparring videos, and there was one full fight that I did watch. And I got the gist of the type of fighter he is. He's a nice, athletic, quick, young, up and coming contender. Fights a little bit upright. He's fundamentally good. He's a good boxer. He does everything pretty well. He's got decent punching technique, decent jab. Looks to have decent power. Just looks like a decent, well-rounded contender. The problem is though, the level of competition that he's been fighting isn't really worth talking about. And when you compare that to Josh Taylor, and fair enough, Josh Taylor has had less fights than Ryan Martin, but when you compare the level of competition and the tests that both of these guys have had, Josh Taylor and his team have tested him basically all the way through his career. I mean, for example, I believe it was his 5th or 6th pro fight, they took on Dave Ryan. Now, I've been to a couple of Dave Ryan's fights, and I've seen him fight live several times, and he's one of these guys here in the UK who's a lot better than his record suggests. He was a guy who had been on the bad end of some controversial decisions. He's a guy who had had injuries and had had issues here and there. And he's just one of these guys who you would look at his record and you would underestimate him. He was a guy who was a lot better than you'd think. For example, he was able to beat Paul McCloskey, who was a very good light welterweight contender. So Dave Ryan was a solid test for a young prospect. And I watched that fight live, and Josh Taylor really impressed me that night. The way that he just completely dismantled and destroyed him in 5 rounds, because nobody had ever been able to do that to Dave Ryan before. I believe he had only been stopped once, and that was on a back injury, I think, in a fight he was winning. So that was an impressive performance from Taylor at a decent level early on in his career, which just highlights the tests that this guy has been through all through his pro career. They had him fighting over in America, so he has had international experience going abroad for fights very early on in his career. They had him fight O'Hara Davis, who was a 15-0 contender himself, a guy who had gotten himself into a ranked position by winning the WBC silver title. A guy who was a very dangerous puncher and an awkward guy to box. Who'd been sparring with Ricky Burns and whatnot. So that was a very stern test, and he came out on top after that test. He fought Miguel Vasquez, former world champion, a tall guy with quick hands and good defense and a good jab, a real solid, conventional, technically sound, experienced boxer who, was a champion for several years and who was still quite young, only 31. So that was a really solid test. A guy who was quite a risk, to be honest. That was a real risk for Josh Taylor to take. And, of course, taking on Victor Postal in his last fight, which was his toughest test to date. And he had some problems in the fight. He did show a few flaws here and there, Josh Taylor did. He was getting caught to the body from the outside. He was struggling to negate the jab of Postal. So clearly, he's been tested, and a few of his flaws have been realised, and I'm sure that they're going to be working on them. But my point is, when you compare the guys that Ryan Martin has been fighting and how he's been developed as a professional, it just doesn't bode well for him going into this fight. I mean, I can't imagine Josh Taylor being able to dismantle guys like Dave Ryan and O'Hara Davis and Miguel Vasquez, and being able to outwork and outbox Victor Postal, to then going on and then getting dominated by this guy. I'm not saying that Ryan Martin can't win. surely he has a puncher's chance. He's a young guy, an athletic guy. He can probably punch, can probably box. I mean, he might surprise us. You know, he might have certain abilities that we don't know about. But personally, I couldn't see that happening. You know, I think that Josh Taylor, to me, just I've got a good feeling about this fight. You guys know I'm a Josh Taylor fan, and you know I'm really rooting for him in this tournament, and I think that he just has the edge in experience here. I really do. He's also got the home advantage. Like I said, the fight's going to be in Glasgow. You know, he's going to have a big crowd supporting him. That's been a good help to him his last couple of fights. You know, in the Winston Campos fight, which I was there for that fight. He was fantastic that night. Took the guy out in 3 rounds spectacularly. Against Victor Postal, it was a tough fight, but I think the crowd, you know, kind of motivated him to come back into the fight. Excuse me a second, I just need to sort something out. I'll be back in a sec. So yeah, I think that all in all, this has come at the right time for Josh Taylor. This has come at a time when he's had several stiff tests in his career, several moments where, you know, he could have got found out, but he came out on top. And I think his team know and are very confident that he could win this fight and win this fight pretty easily. So I'm not predicting it's going to be an easy fight. Okay, look, every fight there's risk, but I just think that Josh Taylor just is the more experienced of the two. I think that he's more proven, and I can see him winning by either a late stoppage or a decision. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching.